My name is Madison Carter Reed. I was 38 years old, the night my family gave my 11-year-old son a cold hot dog, while the other children at our table cut into steaks that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. We didn't include your son in the dinner count, my brother Grant said, sliding the paper tray toward Leo like he was handing food to a stray dog. Across the table, his daughters were eating filet mignon off-white plates with gold rims. My mother didn't even look embarrassed. You should have checked the arrangements, Madison, she said softly, as if I had failed some basic test of motherhood. Leo stared down at the hot dog for a moment. Then he reached for the certificate beside his plate and tucked it carefully under his chair so no mustard or sauce would drip on it. That certificate was the entire reason we were there. My son had just won the Young Civic Engineering Award for designing a low-cost flood alert system using recycled phone parts and cheap soil sensors. It was built for rural families who lived near drainage channels that overflowed without warning. But somehow, my family had turned his night into another celebration of Grant. I looked at my brother and said one word: noted. He smiled, because men like Grant always mistake calm for surrender. What he didn't know was that for the past 4 months, I had been auditing the rail museum renovation he considered the crown jewel of his career. He didn't know what was inside the dark blue folder under my chair. He didn't know 3 board members and the company's outside compliance lawyer were already waiting behind the dining room doors. And before dessert was served, I stood up, lifted my glass, and told everyone that before the night ended, Grant Carter would be removed from our family company. The room went so quiet I could hear Leo breathing beside me. The dinner was being held at the Beckett Rail Hall, a restored train terminal outside Chicago. Carter Civil Works, the company my father built from one pickup truck and a rented office, had handled the restoration. Grant had made sure everyone knew it. His name was in the event program. His photo was on the donor display. Every few minutes, he moved between tables, accepting compliments like the building had risen from dust by his hands alone. What the guests didn't know was that I had found inflated invoices, missing waterproofing materials, and payments routed through subcontractors that barely existed. I was a forensic construction auditor. Companies called me when numbers didn't match concrete, when budgets swelled without explanation, when someone needed to tell the difference between error and theft. My father had asked me to review the museum project quietly after an insurance carrier flagged several cost increases. Grant thought I was gathering paperwork before the annual board meeting. He didn't know my report was already more than 200 pages. Leo's award ceremony had been earlier that afternoon in the museum auditorium. His project came from something real. 2 summers before, our neighborhood flooded, and he sat with an elderly neighbor who was terrified her oxygen machine would be damaged before help arrived. That fear stayed with him. For months, Leo tested sensors in buckets, gutters, and muddy ditches until his warning system worked. When his name was called as the winner, Grant smiled for the cameras, but I saw his jaw lock. His own children had entered the same competition, with a polished miniature bridge clearly built by adults. They received participation ribbons. At dinner, Grant's daughters ordered steak. My parents ordered sea bass. Grant's wife, Marissa, discussed wine with the server like this was a private tasting. Leo waited politely. When the server turned to him, Grant raised one hand. He isn't included. I thought I had misheard. I asked the server to bring Leo the chicken dinner I had selected weeks earlier. Grant leaned back in his chair. We didn't order for your son. Then he nodded to an employee, who returned with the paper tray. Leo whispered, "It's okay, Mom, I'm not that hungry." I knew that voice. It was the voice children use when they are trying to shrink themselves so adults will stop making them the problem. I showed Grant the email where I had confirmed 2 seats and selected Leo's meal. Grant barely glanced at it. Then the venue made a mistake. But the server's face told me otherwise. He looked down, uncomfortable, and Grant dismissed him with a flick of his fingers. That tiny gesture told me everything. This had not been a mistake. Grant had changed the meal order himself. He wanted Leo to understand that winning did not make him equal. He wanted me to remember that inside the Carter name, Grant still decided who belonged. Until that moment, I had planned to give the audit to my father privately after dinner. I wanted to protect the employees, avoid a public scene, and let the board act quietly. Then Leo asked if he could eat in the hallway so he wouldn't embarrass anyone. Something in me went perfectly still. No, I said, you're staying right here. I placed the tray in the middle of the table. Noted. When Grant laughed and said, "Don't make a tragedy out of a hot dog," several relatives smiled nervously. They had spent years pretending cruelty was humor because it was easier than confronting him. I tapped my spoon against my glass once. Conversations nearby faded. My father frowned. "Madison, what are you doing?" Correcting the record, Grant told me to sit down. I looked toward the entrance. 3 members of the Carter Civil Works Board stepped into the room with Nora Bell, the company's outside compliance attorney. Nora carried a locked black case. Grant's smile vanished. Before anything else, I introduced Leo properly. I told the room he had won the Young Civic Engineering Award and asked them to applaud him. At first, the applause was awkward. Then several foundation members stood, and the sound grew stronger. Leo looked up at me with wide, startled eyes. For the first time all evening, the adults remembered why we were there. Grant snapped, "This is a family dinner." Nora answered from the doorway. "Not when the company paid for it." Marissa slowly set down her glass. I opened my folder and held up the first invoice. Carter Civil Works had been charged $19,400 for the dinner. That included premium meals for 26 guests, 2 children who were not present, a champagne reception that never happened, and an executive suite reserved under Grant's name. Leo's confirmed meal had been removed manually that morning. I asked the banquet manager who authorized it. A woman near the back stood and said Grant had sent the revised seating instructions himself. She had saved the email because he had also told staff to bill Leo's original meal to the corporate account while serving him the cheapest item available. Grant's face tightened. It was a joke. "A joke creates laughter," I said. This created a billing discrepancy. Then I told the room the dinner was not the problem. It was only the smallest example of a much larger pattern. Over 18 months, Grant had approved nearly $910,000 in payments to 3 subcontracting firms tied to an old college friend. 2 had no employees, no equipment, and no active licenses. The third billed the museum for waterproofing materials that lab testing showed were never installed. Grant shoved his chair back. "You stole company files." Nora stepped forward. "The board authorized her access. Independent counsel has already preserved the evidence." My father's face turned gray. "Is the building unsafe?" "Not immediately," I said, "but the lower archive is vulnerable in a major storm. Repairs will cost at least $400,000. Grant insisted everything was legitimate consulting work. I placed 3 photographs on the table. Each showed the same empty storefront listed as the office for all 3 companies. Then I showed a payment timeline, including transfers made within days of Grant purchasing a lake house through an LLC. My mother whispered, "Grant?" He turned on me. "You're trying to destroy this family because your son didn't get steak." I looked at the untouched hot dog. "No, the hot dog only reminded me that you still think taking from someone smaller than you counts as winning." Then I made the second reveal. I was withdrawing my professional certification from every public financing application Grant had submitted using my name. Years earlier, he had convinced me to sign a limited technical review agreement for internal bids. My audit showed he had copied my signature block onto at least 7 financing packages I had never reviewed. Without valid certification, those applications now required re-examination. The board chair suspended Grant's executive authority immediately. His financial permissions, devices, and building access would be disabled before he left. Grant looked around the table, waiting for our parents to save him. For once, neither of them moved. So he did what he had always done when cornered. He rewrote the past. He told the board I had been unstable since my 20s. He said I left Carter Civil Works 12 years earlier after an emotional breakdown. Leo's hand tightened around mine. Grant had used that phrase for years because it turned a professional betrayal into a private weakness. "Tell them why you really left," he said. "Tell them you couldn't handle pressure." For 1 second, I was 26 again, standing in a temporary site office beside a highway expansion project. I had developed a method for identifying concrete curing problems before visible cracks appeared. Grant praised it, asked me to send him everything, and promised to format it for Dad. 2 weeks later, he presented the method to a state transportation panel under his own name. When I confronted him, he produced an email that appeared to show me abandoning the project and admitting my calculations were unreliable. My father removed me from the technical team. Grant was promoted. I resigned 3 months later. The damage followed me home. My fiancé, Daniel, worked in the legal department. Grant showed him messages suggesting I had fabricated test results and planned to blame Daniel if regulators investigated. Daniel ended our engagement without ever telling me what he had seen. For 12 years, I believed he had simply stopped loving me when my life became inconvenient. 6 months before the museum dinner, Daniel contacted me after finding archived files during a server migration. The messages were not mine. Metadata showed they had been created on Grant's office computer and routed through an administrative account to make them appear authentic. Daniel apologized. But apologies cannot return 12 years. They cannot give back the apartment you sold, the references that disappeared, or the nights you spent wondering whether everyone else could see some defect in you that you could not see. Still, those files gave me what I never had before: proof. Nora opened the locked case and removed the cybersecurity report. Grant laughed too loudly. Nobody cares about ancient family drama. From the far end of the table, my younger brother Ethan stood. "I care." Grant told him to stay out of it. Ethan ignored him. He admitted Grant had used the same strategy against him 3 years earlier after he questioned a drainage calculation. An anonymous complaint accused Ethan of showing up intoxicated. It was disproved, but he lost the project lead. Grant took over the contract. Grant had kept us separated by feeding each of us a different lie about why the others could not be trusted. Nora handed out summaries. The digital review connected Grant's credentials to the forged messages used against me and to recently altered inspection records from the museum project. Grant looked at our father. We were working for the same company. Nothing belongs to one person in a family business. That sentence hurt him more than any document. My mother finally asked, "Did you lie to Daniel?" Grant rolled his eyes. She would have outgrown him anyway. My mother stood slowly. "You let your sister believe she was unlovable for 12 years. Grant muttered that everyone was being dramatic. My mother removed the gold company pin from her jacket and placed it beside his plate. "No," she said. "We were negligent. You were deliberate." That was the moment Grant became afraid. Losing the board scared him. Losing my mother's protection terrified him. He shouted that I had manipulated everyone because I could not stand his success. Leo stood before I could stop him. "My mom didn't steal your success," he said quietly. "She found where you stole it from." Grant laughed. No one joined him. After the children were escorted to the simulator gallery, my father asked the question he had avoided all night. "How much?" Nora answered. Confirmed questionable payments totaled $910,000. Another $1.3 million lacked proper documentation. There were personal expenses coded as client development, luxury travel, furniture for the lake house, private school donations, and the dinner surrounding us. Marissa asked Grant whether the accounts he managed for their children were real. He would not answer. Minutes later, she was in the hallway calling an attorney. My father still tried to soften the landing. He asked whether the matter could remain internal. Nora explained that public redevelopment grants funded part of the museum. If invoices were falsified, the board had a legal duty to report it. Then my father looked at me. Did it have to happen tonight? The question hurt, but it did not surprise me. For years, my family treated the exposure of wrongdoing as worse than the wrongdoing itself. I planned a private meeting, I said, until Grant deliberately humiliated a child at the dinner, meant to celebrate that child. My father said the meal and the audit were separate issues. They are the same issue, I said. Grant believes rules apply only to people he considers beneath him. He removed Leo's dinner because he could. He removed my name from my work because he could. He removed safety materials from a public building because he believed no one with authority would challenge him. Then Nora placed one last email on the table. 2 days earlier, Grant had instructed the finance director to delete archived vendor correspondence and suggested blaming the missing waterproofing documentation on Ethan. Ethan looked at him. What context makes framing me for fraud acceptable? Grant had no answer. My father removed the signet ring he had worn for 34 years. You're suspended, he said. Grant snapped that the board couldn't remove him because he controlled the largest voting bloc after Dad. I opened the final section of my folder. Years ago, Dad had given all 3 children equal non-voting economic shares, but kept voting authority in a family trust. Grant had told everyone those votes would transfer to him when Dad retired. What he did not know was that 6 months earlier, after the insurance inquiry began, Dad had appointed me independent trust protector because my license required me to remain outside company management. I had authority to freeze voting transfers when credible evidence of fraud threatened trust assets. That afternoon, before Leo accepted his award, I had exercised it. Grant did not control the company. He had never controlled it. He had only controlled our fear of confronting him. Grant left the museum without his phone, laptop, access badge, or family. Security escorted him out after he tried to enter an administrative office. No one ate dessert. I took Leo to a diner 3 blocks away. He ordered pancakes, scrambled eggs, and the largest chocolate milkshake on the menu. He asked if his uncle was going to jail. I told him I didn't know. Consequences would be decided by investigators, not anger. We had presented facts. Grant's choices would decide the rest. Over the following weeks, a national accounting firm expanded the audit. Investigators confirmed payments had been routed back to an investment company tied to Grant. The museum closed the lower archive wing for repairs, though the main building stayed open. Grant gave an interview claiming he was the victim of a family coup led by a bitter sister. That collapsed when records showed my audit began months before the dinner. Former employees came forward. Some described altered inspections. Others produced emails showing retaliation against anyone who questioned invoices. The board terminated Grant for cause. He lost an unvested equity package and the severance he expected when Dad retired. The court froze the lake house while attorneys traced the purchase funds. Marissa filed for legal separation after discovering he had borrowed against one of their personal accounts. I felt no joy watching his marriage fracture. His children had done nothing wrong. I made sure Leo understood we would never mock his cousins or treat them like extensions of their father. Revenge that targets innocent people simply repeats the original cruelty. My parents struggled. My mother asked me to convince the board to bring Grant back in a reduced role. I reminded her that the company employed more than 200 people and built places the public used. Grant's job was not a family allowance. My father said cooperating with investigators might ruin the Carter name. I asked whether he wanted to preserve the name or make it worthy of preservation. He did not answer. For the first time, I stopped managing their discomfort. Ethan became interim director of field operations, but refused the CEO role. He told the board the company needed an outside leader with no family loyalty to protect. They hired Marisol Vega, an infrastructure executive known for rebuilding firms after compliance failures. She created anonymous reporting, separated project approvals from payment authority, and ordered independent safety reviews. Employees who had been punished for speaking up were invited to submit records. Several received formal apologies and compensation. My father stepped down as chairman. His retirement statement admitted leadership failures had allowed misconduct to continue. That sentence cost him more than the title. 6 months later, Grant pleaded guilty to charges connected to falsified business records and misuse of grant-funded payments. His sentence included home confinement, probation, restitution, and a ban from serving as an officer of companies receiving public development funds. Some relatives said it was too harsh, others said it was too light. I stopped measuring justice by whether everyone felt satisfied. Grant no longer controlled employees he could intimidate. The stolen funds were being recovered, the museum was repaired, the people he blamed were publicly cleared. He had spent his life as the untouchable golden son. In the end, the heaviest consequence was not the lost title or the lake house. It was being seen accurately. Almost a year later, Leo and I returned to Beckett Rail Hall for the opening of a youth engineering lab. His flood alert design had been expanded by university students and emergency management specialists. 3 rural communities were testing updated versions near drainage channels that overflowed every spring. Leo's name appeared on a small plaque beside the first prototype. He read it once, smiled, and immediately started showing another student how the sensor worked. He didn't ask whether Grant would see it. He didn't need approval from someone who had tried to make him feel undeserving. My parents attended, but our relationship was no longer built on pretending. I set boundaries before allowing them back into Leo's life. They could not carry messages from Grant. They could not pressure Leo to forgive an apology he had not received. They could not dismiss cruelty as jokes or expect me to stay silent for family comfort. My father eventually apologized without defending himself. I kept asking the injured person to be quieter, he told me, because facing the person causing the injury would have forced me to admit I failed. It was the most honest thing he had ever said. I did not promise instant forgiveness. Forgiveness is not amnesia. Reconciliation is not a debt someone owes, because the truth finally came out. Ethan and I rebuilt our relationship too. We compared years of stories and realized how often Grant had kept us apart with small, careful lies. Isolation had been one of his strongest tools, because people who do not compare experiences are easier to control. Carter Civil Works survived, but it became a different company. Relatives could apply for jobs only through the same process as everyone else. I stayed independent and declined a permanent board seat. For years, I thought reclaiming my place in the family company would prove Grant had not defeated me. Then I realized I did not need his throne. I had built a respected career because I left. Daniel and I met twice after his apology. We forgave what we could, but we did not rebuild what time had changed. Some doors close because of deception, and truth does not always reopen them. That was painful. It was also freeing. Grant eventually sent Leo a handwritten letter. It did not ask for forgiveness. It admitted that excluding him from the meal had been deliberate and meant to shrink his achievement. Leo read it, placed it in a drawer, and said he was not ready to answer. I told him he never had to unless it felt right. Children should not be trained to surrender their boundaries because an adult finally admits the truth. After the lab opening, we ate at the museum cafe. The menu was simple: soup, burgers, grilled cheese, pie. Leo ordered a hot dog. I asked if that bothered him. He grinned. "It's food, Mom." Uncle Grant was the problem. For months, I had treated that hot dog as a symbol of humiliation. Leo refused to let Grant own it. He ate every bite, then ordered apple pie. That night taught me what breaking a toxic family cycle really means. It is not about winning the loudest confrontation. It is refusing to pass the injury forward. It is protecting children without teaching them hatred. It is demanding accountability without becoming cruel. Family loyalty should never require someone to accept humiliation. Peace that depends on one person swallowing pain is not peace. It is obedience. I once believed strength meant enduring everything silently. Now I know strength can sound like one calm word, noted, spoken at the exact moment you decide the pattern ends with you. My announcement did not destroy my family. It exposed what had already been destroying us. The truth cost us titles, money, relationships, and illusions, but it gave Leo something far more valuable, proof that his dignity was not negotiable. And it gave me back the voice I had surrendered 12 years earlier. So I still think about one question. When protecting the family requires sacrificing the most vulnerable person at the table, what exactly are we protecting? Sometimes the bravest act is not forgiving quickly or keeping everyone comfortable. Sometimes it is standing up, telling the truth, and allowing consequences to enter the room.